Hello and welcome back to this Friday edition of Freight Waves Now. We have a special guest. We're getting right into it. Alan Adler. Alan, thanks for joining us this morning.
I love being special. That's a
You
good
are
thing.
special. And you know what
Thank you.
is also special? Stonks. We are talking
are special.
stonks.
Listen, it's got to be, and there's been 35, 40, 50 years of Saturday Night Live. There is one segment that just sticks out of my mind. And so I got to link to it today, which was when Pete Davidson, asked Kate McKinnon, want to buy my stonks? And it worked for today. It worked for today because we're taking a look, kind of an essay, if you will, on the whole issue of what's happened to some of these electric vehicle and infrastructure and autonomous SPACs, the other acronym that we use here, special purpose acquisition companies. This is the fast way to public ownership. Well, the problem is that being public hasn't turned out to be very good for a lot of these companies so far. And, they're pre-revenue or very small revenue companies, and their stocks, quite honestly, since entering the public world, have been hammered. And that started well before Pete Davidson ever asked that question. And it's continued. And so there's a chart in the it's arbitrary, quite honestly, but there's a chart of 10 companies that we follow here at Freight Waves that look at both sort of their intraday price yesterday, as well as the 52-week high and lows that they've experienced. And it's not a pretty picture, quite honestly. The reasons for that are many. A lot of it is that, the love affair that people had when SPACs came out back in 2020. And one of the earliest ones, of course, was Nikola. So as you look at what's happening, you can sort of chart the course for a lot of these companies to what's happened at Nikola. Now, not all of them went through the scandal, period that Nikola did. And it would appear that Nikola has escaped that and is coming out of it. It cost him a lot of money, a big fine with the Security and Exchange Commission that they have to pay over the next 2 years. But what you're seeing now is that money runs low after a short period of time when you come public this way. And even though most of the companies will tell you they have enough money to do their business plan, and not all of them do. And we saw last Friday, we saw that Nikola said we're going to need another $1.2 billion, up to $1.2 billion, maybe not that much, but to keep our business going. So they're going to either sell shares or do some level of equity to get more money in the house. You're going to see this happen elsewhere too over time. We just don't know exactly when.
I think you make a great point about what Nikola is doing. I think you're kind of in that early stages. I mean, that was the kind of the early darling, right? The belle of the ball to start, and then a lot of other SPACs with these autonomous and electric OEMs came public, and now, do you think this is more of a broader trend in the market, kind of staying away from some of these younger pre-revenue, small revenue companies and fleeing money into, like, say, a bigger, more established company, I know this is going to sound weird, but like a Tesla? Or do you think it's like I'm just trying to think, is it a broader trend, or is it just people just don't want to be involved?
It's just a moment on Tesla. It took them a long time to get where they are now. For years, their only revenue came from selling zero emission credits, right? They weren't making money on making vehicles. Now they do, and of course, they're probably not in this group, although they are in the sense that they tend to lead what's happening. If there's a run up in Tesla, you might see some of these others have a good day. Same if they go down. So there is a bit of a grouping there, but the situations are very different. I mean, when you look at the sort of the value of Tesla versus the value of some of these other companies. It's really going to be interesting. I had somebody who's an expert in the space talk to me who said just a couple of months ago, look, there's still a tailwind for electrification. There's no question about that. It's true for electric cars, and it's also true for electric trucks. So I think, you're going to see electrification probably catch on before you see autonomy catch on. I mean, it's interesting because one of the companies that chose not to go SPAC and went with a traditional IPO was TuSimple. And they broke out, or they priced it about $40 when they came on the market. and then they shot up as high as $79, and now they trade around $11 or $12. So they have not been immune to the same issues, even though they've got a balance sheet that has over $1 billion on it. And they are not just arguably, but they are leading the commercialization race in the sense that they're doing, true driver out, driverless trucking pilots right now. But I think that we've got an overall market, obviously, where it's hard to find any winners right now. But it just impacts these guys as well. But I suspect that you will see some recovery, especially as we get more of the infrastructure bill into place and start seeing some of the spending on infrastructure for electric vehicles. Some of these guys are going to come back probably pretty well. One of them that is in my chart that stayed up reasonably well, although it's only around $17 now, is a company called ChargePoint. They've got a lot of experience. They've been around since the last, the 2000s, putting in electric charging stations, and they've got a lot of interesting partnerships and things like that is keeping them going. Utilities are catching up. They're the ones that really have to literally do the trench work for this stuff, on the infrastructure side. So I think some of the infrastructure stuff in electrified vehicles probably does reasonably well first. To some extent, the same with battery makers. I think Proterra, has an energy business in addition to starting out as a school bus maker, electric school buses and buses, transit buses. They've got now, a battery business as well as an infrastructure business. So, they've spread out a little bit. Maybe they're a better play. I mean, we're not making predictions here, but in the sectors, the subsectors, if you will, of electrification, some of them arguably have a better shot at, maybe gaining back some of the love that they lost from the early investors.
And Alan, as you mentioned, there's still quite a few tailwinds moving this forward. But when you see some of the SPAC companies getting hammered right now and see a lot of diminishing, attributes with some of these prices, does that take away from potential more investor money kind of entering the space, or maybe new entries into the market just because it's a little bit shaky right now?
Well, one of the things that happened, Anthony, was that the structure of a SPAC. You have truthfully, there's an initial public offering that raises money for the SPAC first, right? And then the second thing that happens is what's called a private investment in public equity, or a PIPE. And the PIPE shares sell at typically $10 each. And what happened with a lot of these companies right before they went public, before their business combination was formalized, all the people that bought PIPE shares basically were allowed to redeem them in advance of the company going public. Now, not all of them did that, but as we wrote back in November, and what was an attempt at explaining this phenomenon, is that the redemptions really hurt some of these companies when they went public, so they did not have as much money to spend as they thought they would, because a lot of the investors, cashed out before the company went public. And then, arguably, if they even liked the company, they could go back in and buy it at a cheaper price once it went public under the name of the entity. Like Aurora Innovation went through this, and BART Trucks went through this, and some others as well. I think Hyzon had that problem. So what you see is they enter the market, and the stocks are down, in double digits. And so you're already starting from a bit of a deficit position there, and then you've got to build it back. And so far, we haven't had an environment that has really allowed that. And then when people do look and they see that, these are pre-revenue companies, and if they're hitting their milestones, and this is where Nikola, arguably is doing that. I mean, they need more money to keep scaling, but they have done what they said they would do. And this is coming off of, we all know, we've talked about it ad nauseum here about the problems that they had. But they're doing the right things. And yet, even with, going back and selling more equity in whatever fashion they do that, it's going to dilute the current shareholders, right? Their shares are going to be worth less as you have more shares in the market. So you're already seeing sort of a yo-yo effect in their stock price. They got back above $10 last week and early this week, and then they have lost a good bit of it too. So, this morning, I think they're probably around $8. And it's like, that's a tough play. Again, no revenue at this point. They'll probably book revenue in 2023, profitability later than that. But, at this point, I don't think people are interested in going along for the ride with a company that isn't posting revenue. And this is where you've had some sense come back into things versus the days when people were just buying this stuff, almost in a meme-like fashion before there were memes.
Yeah, I think you make a great point. Final point there. People buying it before the memes were popular. It seems like the money that was flowing in has kind of ceased. So
For sure.
Yeah,
awesome.
I'd love to know where that money is, guys. If you know, I would love to know where it went.
We'll go on a hunt for
The
that.
companies that we write about, I think they would love to know that too. A couple other quick ones in the newsletter today in Truck Tech. Interesting survey from a Morning Consult on sort of the trust factors around autonomous driving. Now, most of this is focused on autonomous cars, but public attitudes really have gone in reverse, if you will, on trust in autonomous vehicles. So some of that, you brought up Tesla earlier. Some of that has to do with things like issues around autopilot, what Tesla calls autopilot, and things like that. I think the caution for trucking is that there's a big job ahead in terms of educating and making the public comfortable with autonomous trucks. And right now, probably the best thing can happen while you have safety drivers. Nothing looks different. That the system is running on these trucks. They're running autonomously, but they have safety drivers. Once those drivers come out, as Too Simple has done in the pilots, then you're going to have this sort of I don't know what to call it. There's a lot of movies that get into it, but this idea of this ghost truck, if you will. And I think that's going to take some getting used to. But for right now, autonomy is moving ahead. It's moving ahead quickly. We had 2 announcements this week that of long haul routes, which is ultimately where the value in autonomous trucking comes from. We had Aurora working with Werner Enterprises to go 600 miles from Dallas Fort Worth out to El Paso, kind of the middle mile, the middle route of the cross country trucking. And then the other day we had Kodiak tying up with USX to go from Dallas over to Atlanta. So you're starting to see these routes lengthen, and you're starting to see some of the intent behind autonomous trucking, what they really hope to get done. So I think that's something to keep a watch on. The other thing, back to the SPACs and stuff, I think you're going to see a shakeout here, guys. And I can't say when, I don't know. But I thought it was coincidence that Aurora, which is public, and Kodiak, which is private, but has a lot of ties back to the origins of before Aurora. Could they end up together? I mean, who knows? I speculate. I just want to be the first to say it. I don't know if it's true, but I wanted to be the first to speculate about it. So I did that today.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Alan, so much for that. I know shakeouts happen, especially when in an industry like this where there's going to be one winner first. That first one to actually commercialize it will be the big winner, and then everybody else kind of follows suit. But thanks so much. Feel free to check out Alan's newsletter, Truck Talk. Alan, thanks. Right now, we'll toss it over to Anthony Smith, who has our first shipper update.